No mai haere mai kia koutou katoa. Welcome to everyone for welcome along to this monthly seminar series for Te Hirangaru QuakeCoRE. Ko Caroline Orchiston tōku ingoa. I'm your chair for today's seminar. Housekeeping to start, you'll notice that all of your microphones are on mute. We welcome any questions via the chat at any stage, so please feel free to add your thoughts. I'll be monitoring the chat and posing questions for discussion at the end. I'll also welcome any questions you'd like to ask directly at the end. So just raise your hand using the Zoom function so I can identify you. And also just please make sure that your microphones remain on mute throughout the presentation. And thanks to all of you for your patience, as we've had a couple of reschedules on the seminar. So it's really great to be able to present this one today. So our speaker this month will be familiar to many of you on the call. He's a geoscientist who's become known for his significant contribution to hazard science, particularly volcanic and earthquake risk assessment for critical infrastructure and primary industries. He's also interested in communities and their resilience to natural hazards, including evacuation and loss modelling using geospatial platforms. He's currently a professor of disaster risk and resilience at the University of Canterbury. He's supervised numerous PhD students and developed the Masters for Disaster Risk and Resilience degree program, which is now producing graduates who are contributing to the hazard space across research, policy and practice in New Zealand. He established the rural program in the first phase of the Resilience Challenge and has been the co-lead until very recently. He's on the Volcano Science Advisory Panel and now chairs the Earthquake Science Advisory Panel. He's been an integral part of the AF8 science team since its inception in 2015 and has offered outstanding strategic and research leadership to the program over those years. Most recently, he has been appointed as the inaugural Chief Science Advisor for the National Emergency Management Agency, a half-time role alongside his continuing academic position at the University of Canterbury. For those of you who know Tom, there's no bird person in New Zealand for this role. He's very collaborative. He has a natural affinity for working with practitioners and policymakers as well as scientists. He understands the issues and he's passionate about improving disaster risk reduction in Aotearoa through effective communication and networking, and he's encouraging and enabling of others to also make a contribution. So it's a great pleasure that I introduce Professor Tom Wilson, who's going to talk about his first 6 months on the job as the Chief Science Advisor for NEMA. Today, Tom will share with us his thoughts on the opportunities for QuakeCoRE and the wider research community to effectively engage at the research policy interface to support DRR in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So take it away, Tom.
Gosh, thank you so much, Caroline. What a humbling introduction. I feel like you've stretched a few threads there, so thank you so much. Kia ora koutou. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be here today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to give this presentation and really looking forward to engaging with you all over the next 40 minutes or so. Just acknowledging my sincere apologies for this being bumped a couple of times. The first time was I was put onto a national security system training course at relatively short notice, and which is the reason for the first bump. And then last week we got we had a stomach bug go through our household, and it was grim. Is probably the easiest way to describe it. So here we are today. I'm recovered and refreshed and excited to be presenting. Again, thank you so much for the background, Caroline. It's yeah, very humbling. I've got a few slides here to share, just as much as anything, just to keep me on track with some of these discussions. But as Caroline said, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them into chat, or I'll certainly leave plenty of time at the end for hopefully question answer or discussion, as the case may be. So as Caroline said, I've started this new role in the last 3 or 4 years. Excuse me, 3 or 4 months, and it's been a wild journey. With starting about the same time as some of the protests that were occurring around Parliament, and then also with the Omicron, the first Omicron wave whipping through New Zealand. So it's been a very interesting period. What I was hoping to do today is to just give sort of four or five main topics that I wanted to cover. and really, I guess at the outset, I'm very keen to make lay out the hope and aspiration that maintain a very strong relationship with QuakeCoRE throughout at least my tenureship with this role. NEMA is really committed to strong partnership with research, and QuakeCoRE obviously being one of the real leading lights in this area. So very, very keen for this to hopefully be a very much an ongoing conversation and a strong and enduring relationship. So what I wanted to cover today was a little bit of background around what is NEMA and in a wider sense, the emergency management system, just so we're all on the same page. I must admit, I thought I had a pretty good understanding, but going into NEMA, I've learned a lot. It's been a very, very steep learning curve over the last couple of months. And so I thought I might share a few thoughts and reflections, but it's also been a time of considerable change in this space. And so lots to share with you today. And then home in on what is a chief science advisor. I must admit, until I sort of really saw the role advertised, I hadn't thought a lot about that, what these things are and how they're being used, particularly by the government. And then some of the initial priorities that I've been tasked with and am working on, and then a few perhaps reflections and thoughts around a vision ahead, and then finishing with some chance for hopefully some good discussion at the end. Okay, so NEMA. So NEMA is it's part of the emergency management system. So the way that New Zealand deals with disasters and other risks for the nation is through this emergency management system. And possibly the easiest way to think of it is it's complicated as always. Anything to do with government always is, but it's many subsystems. But the whole idea is that it's interconnected activity, and we're all working across for trying to improve outcomes for emergencies across the 4 Rs, which is the paradigm or the framework that New Zealand has chosen to use around reduction, readiness, response, and recovery. The strategic intent of it is to increase resilience, where we, again, with this audience, I'm not going to get into defining resilience or anything like that, and hopefully these slides make it clear there. But the ultimate goal is empowerment of communities and trying to allow or enable communities to be as independent and working through things as much as they can, or when they do need assistance, that assistance is appropriate and enabling and helping to not just survive, but thrive through these challenging times. So that's just sort of setting a bit of a scene. One of the areas, I've got a slide next around where the sort of journey for the New Zealand emergency management system has been over the last couple of decades and how we've arrived at where we have. But these points at the bottom, I think, are really important. This is the mission that NEMA is really trying to strive for and push the emergency management system towards well integrated, well coordinated, high performing, trusted, collaborative, professional, and science and evidence-based system. This is a slide which I'm sure we could spend hours dissecting and going through, but it's this lovely kind of winding journey of where we've come from in 2002 when we had the initial, or the CDM Act in place, and all the different events and reviews and actions that have led to where we are now. And I just wanted to acknowledge it's been a heck of a 20 years. There's been some very, very big disasters that New Zealand's had to deal with, and some really traumatic and challenging aspects as well, which have informed where current emergency management in New Zealand is at the moment. And it gives us a lot of context for our research activities within QuakeCoRE and the sort of the QuakeCoRE mission too. But I just really wanted to home in particular in the last 5 years, where there's been some big reviews, including the TAG review, and the need, identifying the need for a much more enhanced emergency management system and a much expanded role of central government within that. And that's where NEMA came about in late 2019, where the former Ministry of Civil Defence and Emergency Management changed into the National Emergency Management Agency. And NEMA, as the acronym goes, is a departmental agency of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. So it's quite close to really in the heart of the national security system is the very deliberate intent there. So it's very interesting times, and where we are at the moment is quite considerable reforms going on in this space with the so-called trifecta reforms, substantive engagement with iwi, and strong commitment to much greater and genuine partnership, authentic partnership with iwi Māori and around emergency management, and also with our civil defence and emergency management groups. And I'll talk to a little bit of those things through the lens of this Chief Science Advisor role. These are the sort of generic slides that NEMA gives us when we're doing a talk like this. But again, I think it's really useful and just where those sort of key priorities are for emergency management system and of course for NEMA as that sort of central government agency coordinating a lot of that activity. Communities are at the heart of it. Partnership with iwi Māori, as I've noted, is a high priority, and acknowledging that there's been a lot of talk about that and not necessarily a lot of action. So again, keep that in mind as we go through this today. A big focus on a functional, well-coordinated and high-performing emergency management system, and the reduction of impacts of emergencies. Without going into this too much, I just really wanted to note it's a complicated space, and things that I thought I was fairly well across it, but I wasn't. Learning the breadth and complexity of the emergency management system has been both a massive challenge, but also extremely interesting, particularly as someone that quite likes a bit of systems science. It's been really interesting, and there's a lot going on in this area. It's not just CDEM, I can assure you of that. And if we think at the moment, we're thinking, one of the big risk at the moment for New Zealand is, of course, foot and mouth incursion. So the biosecurity element of the emergency management system is standing up quite a bit. We do currently have an all hazards, all risks approach, and really nested in across these four capitals. And of course, we have a strong focus on Aotearoa in New Zealand, but one of the things I perhaps underappreciated is just how important this reach extends out into the Pacific and across into the wider international community as well, particularly Asia Pacific as a point there. And I really want to acknowledge a lot of the great work that New Zealand does do in the Pacific with some of our partners up there. But in terms of NEMA itself, and again, I acknowledge I'm steaming through this fairly quickly, but hopefully there's some tidbits here which are useful and we can come back to anything that's of interest. But NEMA's function, which are just a little bit different from the former MCDEM, is broken down into these three main aspects. So one of the big things that the TAG review noted was the need for strong stewardship of the emergency management system, and particularly whether there was sufficient, who was owning it and who was really guiding it and ensuring that the emergency management system was in good shape. So that stewardship role is something that NEMA is trying to embrace and grappling a little bit with what that means, and also running up against a little bit of challenges with some agencies saying, well, why are you getting out of your lane with some of these aspects? The second aspect, I think, is as operator, which is what perhaps we would all sometimes think of emergency management with, thinking warning systems and the functional aspects of how emergency management might manifest. That's a big aspect, a big focus, I should say. And Dave Gawn, our chief executive at NEMA, often makes the point is that it's all about ensuring that we have strong operations, as that's the sort of thing that can bring down a government. So that's a clear focus, which has been interesting as a researcher or former researcher or academic coming into this space. And then the third one is as assurer, and looking at ensuring that there's good assurance across the system and so on. I won't dig into that too much here. So big focus on partnerships with communities, iwi Māori, and connections across the emergency management system. Same sort of mantra, which hasn't shifted too much in the last 20 years, of locally led, regionally coordinated, and nationally enabled as an emergency management system. Okay, so I've sort of hopefully set the scene there a little bit. Now I'm keen to dig into what is a Chief Science Advisor. So over the last 5 to 10 years, the New Zealand government has created a number of these roles across different agencies. And many of you might recall Sir Peter Gluckman was the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, who from memory was appointed around about 2008, 2009, possibly 2010, around about that time. And since then, a number of government agencies have chosen to put in a Chief Science Advisor. It's many of the Western democracies have elected to use some form of sort of Chief Science Advisor as a way to bridge research and science, and I mean science in the most holistic and inclusive manner possible, and getting that connection with policy and practice. And I think it's that recognition of there needing to be navigators across that sort of complicated dynamic boundary. And so that's what these roles have been enacted as. They're meant to be semi-independent, and I think it's worth noting that a Chief Science Advisor, they still answer to the Chief Executive of the agency that they're employed by, but there does seem that some agencies give a lot more latitude than others, and I'm very blessed that NEMA, I seem to be given a lot of latitude to waft around the agency, and I've learned this new term lately of lean in to different terms of different projects or activities that are going on, and hopefully provide some assistance. I think one of the really important aspects of the role is that it's an opportunity for NEMA to join the Chief Science Advisor forum, which is a forum of all of the Chief Science Advisors for New Zealand, chaired by Dame Professor Juliet Gerard. And it's a really powerful forum for looking at issues of the day. We have a forum every month, and it'll address big important science topics that might be causing challenge for the government and for the nation. And I think one of the things that I've been quite impressed by is that it provides a really important additional channel for agency-to-agency communication, but also for direct communication with government, where Juliet Gerard is very well regarded by the Prime Minister, and where issues and concerns can be, it's another, I guess, channel to feed that through. So it's been a very deliberate strategic decision for NEMA to bring on a Chief Science Advisor to be able to play in that pool, so to speak. I do just want to take the time to acknowledge that Jill Jolly from Genius Science had been effectively taking that role for the last couple of years, and did an absolutely amazing job there. And so just wanted to acknowledge her considerable contributions. So the role itself, so the NEMA Chief Science Advisor role, so it's surprisingly senior, which is quite cool. I didn't quite grasp it until I really joined. But the position sits within the office of the Chief Executive. So I answer directly to Dave Gawn, and I'm a member of the executive leadership team, which is the group that sits right at the top of NEMA, so to speak. And so there's an opportunity to really get science and research, and again, stressing science in the most inclusive definition possible, into some of these big strategic decisions, and ensure that that evidence-based approach is front of mind with everything that's being done and being considered. So it takes a bit of work to work through the different bureaucracy languages that are being used, but it's certainly it's been really interesting and a good positive challenge so far. The role is 0.5. And so, or FTE or half-time. So it's a half-time secondment from the University of Canterbury. And I think that works well from what I've seen of other Chief Science Advisors, where there's sufficient time to actually get your teeth into things at NEMA and provide some input. Arguably, it'd be nice to have more, but at the same time, I can also retain the ability to be a so-called card-carrying researcher and/or academic. And so ensuring that, I guess, there's legitimacy and relevance in both camps was an important thing, at least for me, and certainly some of the advice that many of the other Chief Science Advisors gave as being an important dimension there, so that you're not just turning into a science bureaucrat or a policy wonk. You've got both those balances there. So that's been, I think, an important reflection early. NEMA's mission for the role is very much supporting, that the role is to support NEMA's stewardship of emergency management system, and really through a science and research lens, and working out what that means and how we can have influence. It's a small agency. It's only 180 people, and it has grown from the days of McDem being 40 or 60 a few years ago to now being 180, and huge rapid growth there. But in the scheme of things, it's still quite a small agency in government. So how does that look when we're interacting with likes of MB or other bigger agencies? The intention is that the role provides strategic foresight in addition to what other aspects of NEMA are doing. Particularly as an example, what does climate change mean for the emergency management system, which is a massive question. But being able to distill down into things like what does that mean for workforce requirements in the next 10 to 20 years? What's the operational tempo of our emergency management systems, and how might mitigative or risk reduction actions stem the pressure on the likes of police, fire, ambulance, etc. Even thinking around, I've made contributions into thinking around, what defence assets might be needing to be procured over the next 20 to 50 years to support some of these types of things. So the question, it's a fascinating aspect. And the term that I always have a bit of a smile on my face around, because I think it sounds a bit, I was going to use a rude term there, but it sounds a bit funny, is thought leadership across NEMA's mission. So the idea, I think, as I have been described to it and from what I can figure out, is dipping into areas where there's need for science, there's need for evidence-based, and where there might need to be some bolstering or additional support in and around that, or checking that everything's been considered as much as one can, and that it's not just a bunch of policy people hooning off in a particular direction, but we are utilising the considerable knowledge base that Aotearoa New Zealand has curated, but also from global literature as well. And I guess that leads really nicely into this next part around ensuring that there's a strong two-way connection or relationship and networks between the science sector, and again, meant as inclusively as possible, and the NEMA and emergency management system. There's already wonderful aspects there, but how can we protect them, strengthen them, ensure that they're safe and sustainable, and grow them as well? And as I've talked already, the Chief Science Advisor Forum is a key part there too. Okay, so I'm just going to change gears a little bit into what I've been working on over the last wee while. So the first thing, and I just couldn't resist putting a Ron Burgundy meme in here, given that it's a Friday morning at the very least, is that bedding in, learning NEMA, what a CSA means, and where help and support might be useful across NEMA, both internal and external, has been, frankly, the priority for the first couple of months. In and amongst that, I managed to get COVID. Along with seemingly everyone in New Zealand, have had a number of illnesses. So it's been a journey, but it's been a real privilege to be able to do it. I've learned heaps. In and amongst all this as well, there's been a huge amount of training that I've had to do in terms of getting even just things like security clearances, learning how different aspects of the system actually works, and modern refreshing training and things like that. It's been really a big part of it too. So I just wanted to start there. But the nitty gritty stuff, where I've been sort of able to get my teeth into a few things, very much aligned with some of the NEMA priorities, and which is around that operational readiness, NEMA priorities for the next 12 months. And so operational readiness and enhancing that, thinking or considering what an alternate national crisis management centre might look like, iwi Māori engagement, which is a very important priority for NEMA, and the trifecta, which I'll talk to a little bit in a minute. So for my priorities of what I've been up to over the last while has been thinking around and a lot of discussion and engagement with what might a genuine and appropriate partnership with Māori look like in and around science. And I'm conscious that that term's wildly inappropriate here, but perhaps around thinking how, if Māori chose to gift the use of mataranga in the emergency management system, what might that look like? And in particular, how might NEMA safely and appropriately support that in terms of providing advice into NEMA and the wider national security system and the wider emergency management system? So that's been a big focus. we've got a lot of exciting, well, I think it's potentially exciting developments there, which aren't quite mature enough to share here yet, but certainly very keen to ensure that Aotearoa Māori is at least on an equal footing with other knowledge systems like our Western science approach. The other thing I've been working a lot on is around our science advisory panels. So many of you will be aware there's been a volcano science advisory panel stood up for the last, in existence for the last 10 years, and has stood up various times. And thanks to the work of Caroline, Jill Jolly, and a number of others who I suspect are on this call, Richard Smith being one, the Aotearoa Earthquake Science Advisory Panel has also been stood up recently, or formed recently, and is finding its feet, but I think in a really exciting and positive way. So one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is how might we expand that use of science advisory panels to support NEMA and the emergency management system, but particularly to unleash and ensure there's a sustainable and coordinated manner of use of science and research expertise during, or before, during and after major disasters in particular. So that's certainly been a big focus, and very keen to have more discussion around that. The other one that I've been really, has consumed a lot of time and thought, and has been the MB's process around the Te Ara Parangi future pathways, or the research science innovation system reforms. And this has got potentially generational implications around what the science system might look like. And it's meant quite considerable impacts for the emergency management system, where it includes the likes of how might GeoNet be funded? How might the National Seismic Hazard Model be funded? And then, of course, the more obvious thing around what are the research priorities and structures that might be supporting knowledge creation, knowledge curation in this space. So that's been a big focus, and there's, again, I can't really say anything because it's all confidential, but there's lots happening in that area. And I suspect it's a poorly kept secret, but I won't declare it here. But there's lots going on in that area, and there's a lot of strategic sort of conversations around what might the system look like in the future. As part of that, we've been mapping the science. I've used the term touch points with NEMA here, where is NEMA using science, both operationally and from research and everything in between, and trying also to identify needs and aspirations as to what that might look like. And both feeding into NEMA's science strategy, how that might contribute to Te Ara Parangi and the future pathways work, but also so that we've got so that NEMA has a more coherent ability to come to the likes of QuakeCoRE and say, well, look, here's some of the research that we are interested in, and these are the ways that we would be keen to take up and learn or adopt or utilize the knowledge that you're creating and going forward. And the fourth one here is a lot of work around the alternate National Crisis Management Centre. So for those of you unaware, that underneath the Beehive in Wellington, there's a big National Crisis Management Centre. The Beehive's getting old. That National NCMC, as it is, National Crisis Management Centre, perhaps has some challenges with it. And so if there was a large disaster that directly affected Wellington, what are the alternative arrangements? Where might that big NCMC facility need to be relocated to? So there's a big project underway looking at that at the moment. Once again, it's all it's all in confidence, unfortunately, so I can't share too much publicly, but there's a lot of work happening in that space, which has been quite an interesting process to get involved in. This is a slide that I didn't quite finish before this getting ready for the talk, but the other big priority has been climate change, and it is a huge priority for government, and I've alluded to a few points as to how it's relevant for the emergency management system. But I think for all of us, it's something, whether you're an earthquake scientist or whatever, or earthquake engineer, there's huge amounts of implication of what climate change is going to mean, both in terms of the climate changing itself, but also how we as a nation and we as a global community adapt and choose to respond to it. It's got implications for us in terms of broader disaster risk management in general. So lots happening in that space. Now, I wanted to flag the notion, or the issue that we've had recently with Bulla and the multiple sustained flooding events that have occurred there and the considerable government intervention. investment, not intervention, investment, to support these small territorial authorities who are coping with some really, really challenging aspects. So there's a lot of work to be done around thinking around appropriate mitigative and adaptation approaches and what that precedent setting might mean going forward. So huge contribution for researchers to look at there in this sort of context of recovery and how that spills into reduction and so on. I also wanted to quickly, I've just noticed time's getting away on us here, but I just wanted to note trifecta. So this is the three elements of a new emergency management bill that's being formed and being formed up at the moment. There's the review of the National Civil Defence and Emergency Management Plan and Guide. And then there's also the roadmap to delivering the National Disaster Resilience Strategy. So that's when people are referring to a trifecta, that's what's going on. Again, that's a huge focus for NEMA. And my role in that has been contributing along with many other elements of NEMA to what science and research might look like. And as part of that, all of those three elements there. Just for the sake of time, I won't talk to the slide, but hopefully there's chances to quickly look at those, what the bill's addressing, and if you want to know more about it, feel free to hit me up afterwards or can put you in touch. So just thinking towards wrapping this around, but the reflections, opportunities and vision aspect I was keen to raise here is a reflection I would take from my 4 or 5 months in the role is that there's a huge appetite and respect for scientific expertise and knowledge in the policy environment in general. So certainly NEMA, but in the wider sense, there's just an incredible hunger for what you are all producing, that wonderful research. But, and there's always a but, these people are very busy. There's an incredible pace of reform going on in government at the moment. So ensuring that what you're producing is accessible and usable is really important. And there's a variety of different ways that we can talk through that and what that might look like. But I did want to also note that the Chief Science Advisor role, the role that I'm occupying or inhabiting at the moment, I would love to frame this very much as it being a two-way pathway for, and hopefully as a safe ally for you as researchers to access into NEMA and the wider emergency management and think very widely with that. I'd really like to hope that it's a safe entry point where as a card-carrying researcher myself and someone that enjoys working across a number of different disciplines and domains, that I can help you navigate those connections if that's useful and appropriate. Inevitably, I'm going to have access to networks that others won't, and acknowledging there's a lot of people on this call that also have many of those networks, like Richard Smith and so on. But I would also humbly request, I would love situational awareness of what you're doing. So keen to learn how I can help you and what you're doing and what's going on. But one thing that I think resonates a little bit here, at least from, I would love you to reflect on how can you help me to help you. So what do I need to know? What do I need to be connected into? Or what are the various NEMA teams need to be around? Keen to have those conversations and on an ongoing basis. I do also think just some final quick thoughts here is research being useful, usable and used is a mantra that we're all pretty interested in. But the policy environment is relatively fast. It's not a bunch of people just sitting around dreaming up policy and reading things all the time. There's a lot going on and they're under time pressure. So think about your research. If you've got stuff that's relevant, is it accessible? So you may have the best amazing research that fits for current policy development or future policy development, but people need to get hold of it, need to be made aware of it and be able to digest it and use it. So journal articles are relatively limited in that scope. So think around other ways. So policy briefs, short videos seem to be also a bit of an emerging thing that are really useful. But how might you participate as well in terms of advisory panels, submissions into formal processes, and developing your network so that you can form those relationships. And I'm keen to help with that. I've made the point already around situational awareness for everyone, but particularly for the likes of Chief Science Advisor roles. We want to know what's going on so that we can help guide and support things there. But again, I would also encourage everybody to think, what might partners want here? How we make it easy for them to access your research and knowledge? And I would certainly stress, your critical thinking is always a key point here. I'm not going to delve into this too much because I'll just chew up too much time talking about it. But yeah, I think it's a really important point that that TEC cores have a really, really important mission to contribute towards around critical thinking development and skills. Opportunities and vision. I think, as I've hopefully stated many times, I think iwi Māori partnership is absolutely critical, and something I'll certainly have as a high priority for the next 12 months, and hopefully the whole duration of my secondment. And then thinking wider as well. I mean, obviously there are treaty partners, so there's a lot to be done there. But even thinking wider in terms of Pacifica and other key groups as well. I would really like to see, sorry, this PowerPoint art's all over the show, a risk-informed emergency management and national security system. I think we have some critical questions to ask ourselves of, do we have the right tools available? We have a lot of hazard models. Do we have risk models? There's a lot of appetite for risk information, for informing that, especially around reduction and recovery. Do we have the right tools and the right system configuration for that? Something that some of you will have heard me talk about before, but I think being research in the science sector has a huge, and again, science meant very inclusively, including, or perhaps I should also say Mātauranga Māori has a huge role to play here in terms of what is the true cost of disasters. So assessing the direct effects we're mostly pretty good at, but what about the indirect and the intangible effects, and showcasing the effectiveness of mitigation actions? I think that has to remain a key priority going forward for all researchers in this space. I think reduction, that really leads into reduction and recovery. My particular view is we have an absolutely vibrant tokotoaki or EQC at the moment, and get on the train. I think they're doing amazing work in this space, and certainly I think partnership with them and supporting them with their mission and their slightly freer room to maneuver, I think is superb. And so that to me is, I think, is a key part here. I think future workforce development, Aotearoa is changing in terms of climate, but particularly our people and what those demographics look like. So what does the future workforce look like? And creating sustainable, safe and exciting pathways into emergency management and I mean emergency management the most holistic possible, is really important here. And I guess finally for me, what is stewardship in the EM system space, particularly in a science context? So I feel like I've said a few things to that already. So just acknowledging time is getting away on me. I might leave it there, but very keen to explore the notions around could NEMA think around a targeted research fund or scholarships and so on. There's certainly live conversations, to use the central government speak. And that's me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time.